our next session is on regional suicide prevention, and we've got three speakers from Lifeline Macarthur. We have Jackie Moore, who is the Executive Manager of Crisis Support and Suicide Prevention, and Jackie has a really long track record of doing some fantastic work in the community around suicide prevention, and she's joined by a great team. We also have Mary Brasile, who is the Suicide Aftercare Service Coordinator, and we also have Carli Desborough, who is the Suicide Prevention Services Coordinator. So please join me in welcoming Jackie, Mary and Carli.
I'm afraid my faith has failed me. Please pray for me. I'm terribly afraid. Suicide is not the easy way out, as many people believe. The pressure of the past few weeks has been too much for me. A job and $150 would have saved me, but I don't believe I'm worth it. I'm a failure. I'm leaving the world unwanted, unloved, and without hope. These words were spoken late one night to an anonymous caller to the late Reverend Sir Alan Walker, over 54 years ago. Alan was at that time Superintendent of the Wesley Central Mission in Sydney. He spoke for some time to that caller, who refused to give his name and address. Some days later, Darlinghurst Police phoned Alan Walker and said, "We have a letter for you." The letter was from Roy Brown, who'd taken his life. Roy had been rejected by his parents and brought up by foster parents. He felt a failure. He'd lost his job and had to sell his possessions one by one. The final straw for Roy came when he had to sell his radiogram. He couldn't live without music and decided to end his life. That was 54 years ago. A couple of weeks later, Reverend Walker received another call from a young girl that said, "Help me, Mummy has taken a whole bottle of tablets and she won't answer." What a visionary Reverend Walker was back in the day, to think the telephone could actually save lives. So we fast forward 54 years. Lifeline now has 39 centres across Australia that take calls. We have just under 1 million contacts per year. These are all from people who are in crisis, and we're there for them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We have over 3,000 volunteers who are there for these people and take these calls. So at Lifeline Macarthur, we're answering just under 40,000 calls with we've got about 86 volunteers at the moment. We're answering just under about 107 calls per day from 4 phones up in Macarthur. But there was a lot more I believed we could do. There was a bit of a frustration from me. We were taking inbound calls. We're saving lives. We ask every one of our callers, "Are you thinking of suicide?" We know we have the skills to keep people safe, and yet we had to wait for the phone to ring. And we knew that we've got a problem with suicide in southwestern Sydney, and how do we support those people? I'm probably not going to go through my bit of the PowerPoint. Is that all right if I just talk? So one of the frustrations for me was also facilitating a suicide bereavement support group for the last nearly 9 years. I was seeing people at the wrong end. I was seeing them when they'd already lost someone. That was also a frustration for me, that we really needed to work more heavily in the prevention side. So prior to the funding from the PHN, we'd started a Macarthur Suicide Prevention Network. We've had a couple of little wins, I think, in the last 18 months. Probably our biggest win is within the next few weeks we're going to have signs placed on the bridges, 3 bridges between here and Mittagong. We know they're a hotspot. We know people take their lives on these bridges. The start for me is to have the signs. I probably won't be happy until we have some barriers up there so people can't take their lives. So we were really happy when the PHN put out their request for proposal, because these were things that I was really passionate about, that we needed in our community. I don't want to just support people who've been bereaved by suicide. We really need to work heavily in the prevention side so people don't take their life. Lifeline Macarthur also offers financial counselling, which we know...
Okay, I think we've got a problem with the slides.
Oh, okay, that's all right.
If you give me 1 second, I'll try and get the word.
I'll just keep talking. So financial counselling. We know people in this area are in financial distress. And we know that 0.5% in interest rates could mean a big difference to a lot of people in our community. So we offer free financial counselling. So if someone's got themselves into a bit of a mess, they can come and see us and we can advocate. And we have seen an increase in the number of people that present that are in financial difficulty who are having thoughts of suicide. So as I said, we were successful in our request, and I thank the PHN for that. And I now have my team, Mary and Carli, and I'll pass over to Mary just to explain what we're doing on the aftercare side.
So these are the initiatives that have been funded for Lifeline, the Suicide Aftercare program, which I'm the coordinator of, Suicide Prevention Networks, which Carli will speak to you about, and she'll also speak to you about the suicide bereavement support groups that we're trying to set up. And next year, we hope to set up some support groups for people who have attempted suicide. We also offer professional development opportunities for staff, volunteers and communities. Basically, that's mental health training, gatekeeper training. So it's all free at the moment. So it's a good one to promote to your community. All right, so the aftercare program is free, which is good. It's for the whole region, so from Bankstown down to Barrel. It's for adults 18 up who have been assessed as able to benefit from short-term telephone support. So it's non-clinical and it's all telephone based. We offer a phone call to the person. It could be on a daily basis, could be on a weekly basis, whatever it is that suits them. And it's just to check in on them and see how they're going. So usually it's people who have limited accessible supports and resources, or it could even be those groups that we've talked about today, where in their communities there's a lot of stigma, and so they keep this hidden and they don't want to talk about it, it's quite secret. This is an alternative that they can actually talk to us on the telephone, and it's all anonymous really, and confidential. It's an outgoing call only, just to check and see how they're going, but we do encourage that if they're in distress, they can call the Lifeline number. So that's the 13 114. Through the phone calls, we monitor their wellbeing, how they're going. If there's an escalation of issues or problems, we then will provide that support. So it could be a referral to another services. We could also, if there's imminent danger and the person is really at high risk, we can also get a police welfare check on them. So that's part of our protocol. The phone calls are provided by experienced telephone crisis supporters. So these are people who have received very good training from Lifeline. It's accredited training and they have supervision. There is some exclusion criteria. Adults at higher immediate risk, of course, they should be really seeing a doctor or the hospital. Existing patients of the mental health services, unless, of course, they need also that a bit of support if there's a lag of time between, before they actually receive that service. And also if they're not really able to connect with us and speak to us on the phone because they have some psychosis or some residual problems from the psychosis or disassociation. So the way it works is that they would consent to receiving a call from us. We take referrals from the hospital, the COMET teams. We will take the PEC team. We can also take referrals from community managed organisations that are seeing or supporting clients that might be in that bracket. The person can also self-refer. We then, once we receive that referral, we make a contact within 24 hours and just establish that rapport, find out if they really do want to talk to us and what's involved and how long that would happen. We give them a self-care kit, which I'll talk about in a minute, but at the same time what we do is basically talk through with them how they're coping, making sure that there's a safety plan and that they're following that safety plan and they've got some supports around them And like I said, it's accredited Lifeline crisis supporters that do the phone calls. The care packs outside on our table out there, we actually have an example of what a care pack is. It's basically a Lifeline bag with just some things in there, some information, pamphlets, information about the actual service, a little bit of stuff around pampering, things they can use for mindfulness, and also some booklets that gives them a little bit more information. And we'll make these available to the hospitals or any of the services that request. Just before I go on to the prevention networks, I just wanted to give you some statistics just to show you, well, I'm surely not speaking to, I'm speaking to a converted audience here. We already know what it's all about. That's why you're here. But it's quite sobering to know that in 2015, the Australian Bureau of Statistics reported that over 3,000 people died by suicide. So that's just the reports from the coroner's office. There are probably a lot more than that are not recognised as suicides. So if you can imagine car accidents, motor vehicle accidents, it's not always easy to tell. But we do know that approximately 76,000 people a year attempt suicide in Australia. That's an incredible large amount of people. We also know that just because the person has gone into hospital and received the care and then they're discharged, we know that that's not always the time to let your guard down, that that's actually a very high-risk group and there's ongoing, danger there. So we have to monitor that. So this particular program has been put in place to offer that sort of support and hopefully to stop people from reattempting suicide. And really all it takes, it's non-clinical, so all it takes is just that phone call based on what Lifeline do every day. It's just a phone call, how are you going, a person to talk to, a person that shows that they're caring about them. And that's all we can offer, but we will evaluate it and certainly we will see how it goes. But I'm saying that this is quite an innovation for our region and it's the only one of its kind in this region. So we want to make it work and I'm sure it will work. In conjunction with setting up the Suicide Prevention Hub and the Suicide Bereavement Support Groups and next year the Eclipse Groups. So thank you and I'll just pass you over to Carli who will talk about the next part of it.
Just push that up a little bit. A lot. Okay, so our project also includes the development of the suicide prevention networks throughout southwestern Sydney. So we're looking at Bankstown, Liverpool Fairfield, Macarthur, which we know is already established, and the Southern Highlands, and additionally a regional southwestern Sydney suicide prevention hub. So our objective is to bring together health, education and emergency service professionals and community members to help save lives. So by identifying and establishing collaborative community responses and prevention strategies, looking at means restriction, increasing suicide education and awareness and breaking down that stigma surrounding suicide. Survey findings released yesterday on World Suicide Prevention Day indicate that Australians have mixed attitudes, beliefs and behaviours towards people who die by suicide, and an inaccurate and uninformed understanding about suicide and suicide prevention. 20% of Australians believe that talking about suicide increases the risk of suicide, and more than 1/3 of people were not sure. When in fact, we know, and research shows, that asking someone if they're suicidal isn't going to plant that idea in their head. In fact, it opens the channels of communication, opens those doors to people getting help, to feeling heard and understood, and to finding the right support that they need. In relation to these recent findings, Suicide Prevention Australia CEO Sue Murray said, "Evidence tells us that stigmatising attitudes result in people being less likely to get help or give help. If we don't speak up about persistent stigma, we're at risk of perpetuating a society where we remain reluctant to reach out for help for ourselves and others. And she also said, we must work to debunk the myths surrounding suicide and change the way we think and communicate about its prevention. These are big changes, but changes that need to begin with the individual, the family, and the community. And this is exactly the purpose of these suicide prevention networks. Okay. So our Eclipse groups, the support group for survivors of suicide attempts, as Mary's already said, that won't be happening until early next year. But our suicide bereavement support groups are already happening. So again, within the Bankstown, Fairfield, Liverpool, Macarthur and Southern Highlands areas. So in regards to the groups, while we know that grief is a normal response to losing someone important to us, when someone dies by suicide, we may experience many complex feelings, thoughts and behaviours. While individuals work through their personal language differently, some aspects of suicide bereavement are common. And some of these common experiences of grief following losing someone to suicide include shock, numbness and denial, asking why, and searching for any reason for the suicide. There's often guilt, feeling responsible for not preventing the suicide, and also to that as well, sometimes there's relief, but then there's the guilt associated with that relief. There's often anger and blame, and again we come to the stigma and shame. And people often worry that other people will think negatively of the person who has died, but also on their family and friends that they've left behind. Loneliness, social isolation and disconnection, difficulty trusting others, feeling abandoned and rejected, and more often than not, family relationships are affected. And then there's depression and also a heightened risk of suicide for those left behind. And coming to accept that the loss will be a permanent part of their life. It's not something that you'll ever get over, but it's learning how to continue life and to grow around it. So our support groups are designed to be a safe place for adults, so again, aged 18 and over, to share their thoughts, ideas, feelings and experiences with others who understand. The groups are closed groups that run for 8 weeks. They're semi-structured, but they're also very flexible. So depending on what those group members feel that they need to share, that they need to talk about, we do have that flexibility. And so they're structured so that those who are bereaved can share their experiences, as well as being supported in managing and also, importantly, understanding their grief. So gatekeeper training. So I know a lot of you in here are either aware of, have already done, or are going to do later in the year some of our gatekeeper training. So does everybody here know of ASSIST? I've heard of ASSIST, yeah. So I'm going to have to read off the screen here. So regardless of age, prior experience or training, anyone can become an ASSIST trained caregiver. So ASSIST is Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. It was developed in 1983 and regularly updated to reflect improvements in knowledge and practice. And ASSIST is the world's leading suicide intervention workshop. During the 2-day interactive session, participants learn to intervene and help prevent the immediate risk of suicide. So over 1 million people have taken the workshop, and studies have proven that ASSIST method helps reduce suicidal feelings for those at risk. Now our Safe Talk, it's not a 2-day course, it's a bit shorter. So this is available for anyone 15 years and older, and requires no formal training or prior experience in suicide prevention. It only takes up about half a day to learn, and it's an excellent tool for people who want to become alert to the dangers of suicide in a convenient time frame, so not over 2 days. by providing a universal model with adaptable components, Safe Talk offers useful skills to every audience. And we've also just secured, is it 500? 500 online keys for an e-Safe Talk. So this course on an online environment that people can do in the comfort of their own home at a time that suits them. And those keys we are able to give out within the communities. So we're also offering the mental health first aid and also the mental health first aid for the suicidal person. So the mental health first aid for the suicidal person is a 4-hour course that is almost like an add-on to the mental health first aid, but is also very important on its own. And it teaches us to offer mental health first aid to a person who is experiencing suicidal thoughts and behaviours. And as I said, it is a standalone course that complements the standard mental health first aid. And we can provide, so it's all done through Eventbrite. We can either give you the link or, because I don't think it's on here. It is there? There we go. So if you just go to Eventbrite and search for Lifeline Macarthur, everything that's coming up until I think it is the rest of the year that it's on there for, you can see what's happening. So all throughout southwestern Sydney, you do have to register for the training. And if you are interested, we suggest getting in quick because it is proving really quite popular. I think that's it.
Thank you so much to the three of you. I think we've actually got time for maybe 1 or 2 quick questions. Does anybody have a question that they'd like to ask? Yes.
Does the person, so for the phone that's aftercare, does the person have to have been discharged from hospital? Could they have, say, been to my centre, expressed that being suicidal, or there's enough evidence to say that we have to close now, they have to go home, I really lost someone to call them? Is that part of the program?
No, it's
Okay, so just maybe if we come to the mic, just so it can be recorded. So the question is, does somebody have to have been discharged from hospital in order to be eligible for the aftercare service?
They don't have to be discharged from hospital, but they would have had to have attempted suicide. Yeah. So if they're feeling suicidal, it's best to refer them to the Lifeline number, especially for after hours. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm thinking maybe time for just one other quick question. Any other questions? Yes.
With the bereavement support group, what age, from what age can it use that?
So they are for
Okay.
adults 18.
Do you want to come to the mic? So the question is around what age do people need to be to attend the suicide bereavement groups?
Yep, so they are for adults aged 18 and over. Yeah.
Thinking if having one for like teens and that sort of thing, because they're affected by suicide as adults.
So the question is, what about bereavement groups for teens? Yeah?
Absolutely, they are affected. At this stage, the groups are for 18 years and over, and depending on how they go and what happens, then possibly. But yeah, at this stage, for adults, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I have to say that there's no doubt in my mind that services like the ones you've just heard described here today absolutely save lives. Please join me in warmly thanking Jackie, Carli and Mary.